1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. All the 1s are Marines, all the 2s will be in the Army, all the 3s will be in the Navy, all the 4s will be in the Air Force. Those odds suck. So my father says, before you do anything, let me make a phone call. My father's a flight engineer for Pan American World Airways. It doesn't exist. It owned the airways in its day. He just happens to know the flight engineer on Air Force One. Makes the call. The next day, the phone rings. My father answers the phone and looks at my brother and says, "It's for you." He says, "Hello." I can't repeat what the fella said. He says, "I don't know who the F you know, but you have 24 hours to get down to the recruiting station. You're in the Air Force now." Isn't it nice to know someone who can make a phone call? How many of you know someone who can make a phone call? Very few hands go up, right? It's a nice privilege, okay? Now, I'm going to make a contrasting statement. I never talk about this, but I want to make a point. Because we're all not compelled to take advantage when other people don't have advantage. So, I'm done with grad school, and they've run out of bodies for the war. They're sending home 114 boys in body bags every week. So they have the second draft lottery. Now, the draft lottery works this way. They have a big bowl, and it's got 365 pieces of paper in it, January 1 through December 31st. And they have 4 people, because some reach way down, some are at the, and they start pulling numbers out. That was my number, and I think they stopped at 153, which meant that night I was about to go off to war. And the phone rings. And it turns out to be a friend of mine, John Duchendorf. "Hey, John, how you doing?" "Oh, I'm sorry. That's his real name. You know him as John Denver. John and I have been friends since '65. "Hey, what's happened?" I said, "Well, I picked up 58 in the draft lottery. I'm going to war." And he goes, "You want me to make a phone call?" You can make, I thought all you knew was Milt Oken and RCA records. Just, no, if you want me to, I'll make a phone. Now, to be real honest, I was against that war. I marched against it peacefully, First Amendment. I thought it was a waste of lives. But those men that went to war protected my right to peacefully protest against it. And so I happen to say, and I don't mean this as a superior to my defective twin brother. And I said, "Well, I appreciate the offer, but now I'm going to go ahead and put my time in, and when I come home, we'll get together again." Privilege doesn't always mean advantage. It depends on how we use it, what our social conscience is. Everybody follow what I'm saying? Why I told you that? Okay. So Rawls says we have a problem. How do we try and level the playing field as best we can? It's never going to be equal. So John comes up with what he calls a lexicon. A way to try and level the playing field. He says what we need to do is make sure everybody has the freedom to try. So there's going to be 50,000 people applying for 5,000 seats in medical school. 45,000 aren't going to get it. Let's say 15,000 are equally qualified. That still means 2 out of 3 are not going to get into school. We have to have the freedom to apply. That opportunity, if it falls our way, and we'll get into this next week when we talk about affirmative action and diversity, gives us the possibility of being able to make wealth. If you don't have the freedom, you never have access to the opportunity, and the ability to make wealth won't work for you, okay? But John says, we don't live in that world. How would this work if we could rework the system? So you'll see this on your quiz. Rawls says we need to go back to the beginning before we made any rules up. And let's begin to make rules. He said, oh, but we have to add this to it. He said, in order to make up the rules, we need to take away everybody's advantage. So Rawls invents something, you see this on your quiz, it's called a veil of ignorance. You have no idea if you're male, female. You have no idea what your ethnicity is. You have no idea what your health is. You have no idea what your social status is going to become. You're completely behind a veil of ignorance. He says, now, not knowing anything about yourself, since we're all self-interested, what rules would you make up? How many of you would vote for slavery? It's ludicrous. What if you ended up being a slave? Who would vote for women making more money than men for the same job? Raise your hands. And then you turned out to be a man. He says, therefore, behind the veil of ignorance, we would get the fairest set of rules possible. And what would those rules be? Freedom, opportunity to make wealth. Access is what you need, and everybody must have equal access to at least try. Now look, you get doctors that fail. Sorry about that. You get nurses that fail. You get people that fail on a regular basis. Not because it's intentional. We call it the Peter principle. They're in over their head. But at least you need the freedom to take the opportunity to try and pursue your own happiness. Okay? Rawls says this is good, but this isn't really good enough. We still need 2 more principles to kind of get the level playing field. So the first one he calls, and I'll bring the notes up to see it, the first one he calls is the equality principle. Equality just means freedom for all. It's equal to everybody. The important one is number 2, the difference principle. He said, because he's a capitalist, he says it's okay if people make more money, but if they're advantaged, that advantage has to produce access for the people at the bottom. So what does that mean? Well, if you're a doctor, you're going to make good money, but everybody should have access to health care. So we've worked that out in our system. Everybody can go to the emergency room and get treatment by the doctor. Will the doctor get paid more than the sanitation engineer? Probably. Will a pilot of an airplane get more than the baggage handler? Probably. But we're going to take the wealth in such a way that we distribute it so that everybody at least benefits from the system, even though it produces an advantage to some people. We do that all the time. Minimum wage changes. The people at the top with the greatest advantage, half the wealth, $9.5 trillion, are going to have to give up about $850 billion to give you guys $15 an hour. About 100 million people work for minimum wage. Poor people are only going to have to deal with life with about $8.75 trillion. And they're probably going to gripe about it. But it's a more equitable system. They get more money. They ought to be taxed to some degree so the weakest part of the economy, the weakest chain, the people who get minimum wage, are benefited from their capacity to make wealth. They're making gigantic amounts of wealth. I mean, Jeff Bezos is a 100 billionaire. Whoever thought you'd see a 100 billionaire? And so we have the system to try and rectify the indifferences that the system produces. Okay? Which brings me to the Achilles heel. The engine that drives capitalism is called greed. Get all you can, while you can. When I was 16, I was delivering newspapers, and I delivered to a guy who had a brand new 1963 Corvette. I said, wow, you own a Corvette? He said, yeah. I said, what's it cost? Back then, $13,000 was a lot of money. You could buy $1,500, you get a brand new Volkswagen. Wow, how'd you manage to do that? He said, I'm a millionaire. I said, are you going to retire? He says, no, I'm going to make another million and another million and another million. That's why Jeff Bezos made $100 billion. People want more rather than less. Which brings me to the Achilles heel, greed. Greed produces monopolies and collusions. You notice when you go to the gas station, all of them raise the price at the same time to the same amount, and then they lower the price to the same amount. There's only 5 oil companies. Back in the day, we had 200, and we had something called competition. You have a gas station on every corner. There was a day when I could go to the gas station. You know, some people play pool for money. We would play tennis. You go to a gas station and we get our quarters together, and for 75 cents you could fill up your car because gas was 19 cents a gallon. Well, across the street it was 22 cents a gallon. Over here it was 23 cents a gallon. Over there it was 25 cents a gallon. And they were competing for your money. Now we don't compete for your money. Everybody goes up, everybody goes down. So that's monopolies and that's collusion. And greed is what drives it. So greed drives the market. Make all you can. But greed can also turn around and crash the market. That's what happened in the Great Depression. The banks decided to make as much money as they could. You became their fodder. When the system ran out of steam, you all had to deal with it. And it was a crash. Those at the top did not crash. But you all crashed. Do you have any basic questions about that? So let me show you the notes again, people. This is just facts. This is nuts and bolts. This is Rawls's case for economic equality, and these are the principles. It's not anything I really have to go over to share with you. But I do want to bring up, you'll see these 3 economic principles of justice. Do not confuse these. Whoops. You're kidding. I thought I brought them up. Here are three theories of economic justice. The entitlement conception we talked about, John Locke. Robert Nozick, I didn't bring up. Nozick is another name you're going to see. Nozick is a strict libertarian capitalist. You make the money, you ought to be allowed to keep all of it, except for standing military, police force, fire department, health, and education. He says the government should in no way be in the business of distributing wealth. This theory endorses the entitlement conception of justice. Those who earn it honestly have the right to distribute it as they see fit. It maximizes individual freedom. All forms of coercion except to prevent harm to life, liberty, and property are wrong. Wealth, he says, in a society is the individual's wealth. Rawls comes along and he agrees with the idea of capitalism, but he says wealth in a society is society's wealth as well as the individual's, because it takes all members of society to create wealth, even if a few become extremely wealthy. So you hear stories about Bezos people driving around in trucks and, pardon my example, using soda bottles to urinate in because they have to keep going because they have a quota, and if they don't meet it, then their jobs become in jeopardy. I'm not being critical of him. I'm just saying water's not the only thing that flows downhill. And so the wealthy become very wealthy, and people at the bottom end up living check to check. Rawls says that's not fair. You can make as much money as you can, but there has to be a just distribution of wealth. Everybody follow that concept for me? Okay. I think just one more I want to bring up for you that I thought I had up here. Here it is right here. You're also going to be tested, if by chance you see this, on three principles of economic justice. These have nothing to do with any of the gentlemen we've talked about. The first principle is called the equality principle. This principle says in a society we should all get an equal amount. So the pilot gets the same thing as the baggage handler. We have $20 trillion economy, 330 million people, divide the pie up equally, and everybody gets the same thing, regardless of what you do for work. The second principle is the need principle, which is really the equality principle after you take care of everybody's needs. So let's say you have a need for a car to go to school, and you would like a Porsche, and unfortunately I'm going to buy you a Chevrolet. I take care of your need, not your wants. So if we have a $20 trillion economy, let's say there's $5 trillion worth of needs. We take care of everybody's needs. What's left over, we divide up equally. So the need principle is just like the equality principle once we take care of people's genuine needs. The one that we use in this country is called the merit principle, or what we call meritocracy. You deserve the dessert or the reward of your labor. So you work hard for promotion, you expect to get the promotion. When your boss gives it to his nephew who's a jerk, that's not fair. You work hard for it, you deserve the reward of your labor. So you work hard for an A in this class, you deserve an A, right? Do I have any right to say, well, there was a professor here at one time, 71 was a C, 81 was a B, 91 was an A. He made his own rules up. People said, that's not fair. Under any other class, I would have gotten an A or a B or a C. I don't care. These are my rules. You work hard for it, you merit the reward. We call that just desserts. Meritocracy is how we try and run things in this country. So if you work hard at a job, you ought to deserve the reward of your effort. Everybody follow that concept? So you're going to see three principles of justice: equality, need, and meritocracy. If you see those on your test, you should be okay with them. Other than that, any questions for me? This is all nuts and bolts, people. This is all nuts and bolts. No reason you can't get 100% on this quiz. Okay?